Once upon a time, there was a young woman named Elena Hart, who had spent most of her life believing that silence meant safety. She had learned this the hard way, in a childhood home where secrets were more common than laughter, and every locked door seemed to whisper a warning. By the time she turned 27, Elena thought she had mastered the art of living quietly, invisibly, untouched by the chaos of others. But on the night her story truly began, silence betrayed her. It was raining hard, the kind of rain that wrapped around her small apartment in sheets, making the windows tremble. Elena sat at her kitchen table, her chin resting on her palm, staring at the single envelope in front of her. It had no return address. Just her name written in handwriting she recognized but hadn't seen in over 15 years. Her pulse skipped. The letters slanted in the same way her mother's used to when writing grocery lists, except Elena's mother had been buried a decade ago. Her breath caught. She'd told herself it was a trick, a mistake, maybe even a prank. But her fingers were already trembling on the paper, peeling back the edge, tearing the silence apart. Inside was a single piece of notebook paper. Scrawled across it, messy but certain, were 6 words that made the ground beneath her feel unsteady. "You're not who you think you are." Her chest tightened. She dropped the letter as though it had burned her. Elena stood, pacing her kitchen, trying to breathe. The rain outside only grew heavier, as if pressing against her apartment, urging her to read it again. She picked the paper up once more, staring at the words until they blurred. Her mind spun through possibilities. A cruel joke, a mistake in identity, some stranger's obsession, yet deep inside, a familiar ache stirred. The ache of never really knowing the truth about her family, about the things her mother never spoke about. The letter had pulled something open in her, something she had tried to keep buried. At that exact moment, her phone buzzed on the counter. She jumped, nearly dropping the paper again. An unknown number flashed across the screen. Against every instinct she answered. "Elena," a voice whispered, low and urgent, like static wrapped in breath. "Don't throw the letter away. It's the only proof you have left." She froze. "Who is this?" she demanded, her voice breaking despite her attempt to sound firm. The line went dead. Intermission. 30-second suspense pause for audience retention. Imagine yourself in Elena's shoes. A letter from the dead. A phone call from a stranger. A message that questions your entire identity. Would you run? Would you hide? Or would curiosity pull you deeper, no matter the danger? Now, let's go back to Elena. Her knees felt weak. She dropped into the chair, clutching the phone. A part of her screamed to call the police. But what could she say? "Someone sent me a letter that looks like my dead mother's handwriting." Someone whispered at me through the phone. She knew how it would sound. Like paranoia. She'd pressed the phone to her chest, trying to steady her heartbeat. The apartment suddenly felt too quiet, the rain too loud, the shadows too sharp. Her gaze darted to the hallway mirror. She swore. For a split second, she saw movement there. Her own reflection tilting its head before she did. She blinked. Nothing. Just her pale, wide-eyed face staring back. Elena laughed nervously, but the sound didn't feel like her own. She pushed herself up and began to gather the torn envelope and letter, shoving them into a drawer. Whatever this was, she wasn't ready for it. Not tonight. That's when she noticed something else. The faint smell of perfume. Not hers. Not from outside. It was her mother's perfume. A warm, powdery scent that hadn't existed in her apartment before this very moment. Her skin prickled. She whispered into the silence, barely audible. "Mom." The lights flickered. Her phone buzzed again. This time, no number appeared. Just one word on the screen. "Listen." Elena's hand shook so badly she almost dropped it. She backed into the wall, staring at the glowing screen. The room felt smaller, pressing against her like the rain outside. Then, a faint knock at the door. Not loud, not rushed, just deliberate. Her breath hitched. She hadn't told anyone about the letter. No one should even know she was awake. Slowly, cautiously, she stepped toward the door. Each footstep echoed louder than the storm. She pressed her eye to the peephole. Her stomach flipped. There was no one there. And yet, the knocking came again. Silence was Elena's best friend. In fact, She'd been friends with silence for so long that it was second nature to her. She had perfected the art of ignoring things, even when those things were screaming out to be heard. This was because Elena had grown up in a household where speaking up was dangerous. As a kid, she'd learned that sometimes silence was all that stood between her and pain. So it was no surprise that when she left her parents' house and started living on her own, she continued to surround herself with silence. She made few friends and kept to herself most of the time. The only sounds she ever really had to endure were the ones she could escape, like the neighbors' loud arguments or the blaring TV from the apartment across the hall. But these noises never bothered her, because she knew they couldn't hurt her, or at least she thought she did. One day, though, everything changed. It began with a letter. Elena was sitting in the quiet of her apartment, eating takeout noodles, when a thick envelope slid under her door. She wasn't expecting any mail, so naturally she was surprised by the unexpected visitor. When she looked down at the address, she realized it wasn't addressed to her. The name scrunched up in her gut, making her stomach twist, because in the neat looping handwriting, she saw the name Elena Hart, which was her name. But this handwriting wasn't hers. In fact, it was identical to her mother's. Elena's mother, Amelia Hart, had passed away 10 years ago from cancer. And if Elena had $1 for every time someone had commented on how much her mother's handwriting looked just like hers, well, she could have bought a new apartment with all that money. It wasn't that she didn't appreciate the similarities, but it was a bit unsettling to see them pop up in the most random places. And this was especially true considering how much her mother's handwriting had tormented her growing up. She remembered hiding letters from her mother under her bed, knowing that if her father saw them, he'd rip them up and tell her that she wasn't allowed to receive letters from anyone other than her teachers. He always said she should be grateful that her mother died when she did, otherwise she would have brought nothing but sadness into their lives. And then he'd take Elena to her mother's grave and make her stand next to the cold stone monolith, while he told her how much better off she would have been without a mother like Amelia, who was too busy being an actress to raise her properly. Elena didn't believe any of it. She loved her mother very much, even if she didn't understand why she chose to leave her father, although she understood the reason why her mother changed her name to Elena when she moved away. She didn't want to be reminded of her abusive father. But enough of the past. Elena broke the seal on the envelope and quickly felt dread pool in her chest. On the inside, there was only a single sheet of paper, and scrunched up in the center was another piece of paper. Elena carefully unfurled it to reveal the message. All it said was, "You're not who you think you are." Elena's mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. Was this some kind of joke? Who would do such a thing, and why? Before she could ponder the question any longer, her phone rang, snapping her out of her thoughts. The caller ID said the number was blocked. When she answered, the line was silent for a moment, before a raspy, whispering voice said, "Don't throw the letter away." Before hanging up, Elena's heart pounded against her ribs like a trapped bird. She stared at the phone, unsure what to do. Should she call back? What if the person on the other end wanted to talk to her? What if she had something important to say? But then again, maybe it was a prank call. Maybe she should just forget about it and move on. But then the words, "Don't throw the letter away," echoed in her head. Who was this person, and what did they know? Before she could convince herself that the call wasn't anything more than a prank, her phone buzzed again. This time the caller ID still said that it was blocked, but under the name Elena Hart, the same name that was written on the envelope. But when she picked up, the line was dead. Elena tried calling back, but it went straight to voicemail. Then her phone vibrated again. Startled, she swiped to answer, but instead of a name or a number, the screen simply read, "Listen." As the word hung in her mind, Elena suddenly noticed that the lights in her apartment flickered ominously. She looked over at the envelope and then back at her phone, suddenly feeling like she was being watched. Her heart pounded in her chest, threatening to burst out. Her breathing became shallow, each breath hitching in her throat. Her body was tense, ready to spring into action, to run, to hide, to do anything to escape the mounting terror. Then, as abruptly as it started, the sound of shattering glass cut through the tension. Elena jumped, whirling around to face the window. The glass panes lay in pieces on the floor, but there was no sign of forced entry. Outside, The city stretched out beneath a blanket of night, twinkling with the lights of distant street lamps. The wind, playing havoc with the tall buildings, moaned like a lonely soul. Elena rushed to the window, her fingers tracing the shards of glass. Was it an accident? Had someone broken in and then left? Or was it a warning? Shakily, she bent down to pick up the letter, her fingers brushing against something wet. Startled, she pulled away to see a small bead of what seemed to be blood on the tip of her finger. Panic surged through her, making her head spin. She dropped the letter as if it had burned her. Elena stumbled back, her eyes wide with fear. Suddenly, a familiar scent drifted through the room. A perfume she had smelled 1,000 times, her mother's perfume. Elena froze, her heart sinking. The apartment was small, the walls bare, the air stale. How could anyone have entered and left without her noticing? Trembling, she turned away from the window, desperately seeking an explanation, an answer. Then, she noticed something that made her freeze. In the mirror behind her, she saw herself standing in front of the window, except it wasn't her. The reflection was identical, yet subtly different. The stranger in the mirror was Elena, yet she wasn't. It was as if the reflection was watching her with an eerie familiarity, mocking her with its knowing stare. Elena felt a chill crawl up her spine. Who was this person? What did she want? Why was she here, too? As these questions echoed in Elena's mind. The silence of the apartment was shattered by the distinct sound of footsteps. Heavy footsteps. They seemed to come from right outside her door. Elena froze, her body tense. She listened intently, trying to decipher the sound. Were they coming closer, further away? Then she heard it again, louder this time, the sound of someone walking towards her door. With each step, the sound grew more distinct, more real. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. Her breathing quickened. What was happening? Who was out there? Was she in danger? Fear propelled her into action. She needed to hide, to lock herself away until the sound passed, hoping it would go away and leave her alone. But as she fumbled for the doorknob, she hesitated. Should she lock the door? Was it wise to hide? Would that be the best course of action? But then the sound came again, this time right outside her door. It was no longer a sound from afar, but a sound close enough to send shivers down her spine. Someone was outside her door. Then came a knock, 3 sharp, deliberate knocks. Elena froze, her hand hovering over the doorknob. Who was out there? Was it safe to open the door? To investigate, she cautiously approached the peephole, peering through the narrow opening. But what she saw sent a jolt of fear through her. There was no one there. The hallway was empty, the corridor silent. Yet the knocking persisted. It continued, steady and rhythmic, right on the other side of the door. And that's the end of the story. Please like and share with your family and friends. So please click the subscribe button. Thanks for watching.